Hi, everybody. It's Trish Carr from Women's Prosperity Network, and I'm here for, my browser lost connection to my camera. Let's restart my browser. Click the camera button to try again. Well, let's do that. There you go. Hi, everybody. I don't know what that was. Are we in retrograde again? How funny is that? But we
Yeah.
are here live at Sister to Sister with Women's Prosperity Network. And I'm so glad that you chose to be with me today. We're going to be here for about the next 20 minutes or so. And I have a wonderful guest with me. This conversation is always about racism. It's those uncomfortable conversations that just have to be had. And as a white person, I always thought, a year or so ago when we were first in the throes of the new civil rights movement with Black Lives Matter and with what happened with George Floyd and just all of the things that happened, especially last summer. I really wanted to use the platform that I have been so blessed with at Women's Prosperity Network to do something good. And I knew that I needed to learn. I knew that as a person who grew up in a white community, and yes, I had a few Black friends, as people say, right? But I was socialized as white, and I knew I needed to learn what exactly can I do? Where is this systemic racism? Where is it happening that I do not see? You all have heard the term scotoma, right? That picture that you look at, that when you look at it one way, you see a young lady, and when you look at it the other way, you see an old lady. Well, it's the same thing with us. We see things one way. So the whole purpose of this conversation is so that we can shed a light on the reality of people of color and how they see racism in their everyday lives. Because until I see that, I will not be able to see anything. So I'm very excited today to have an amazing woman with me, Dr. Margaret Fournier. I was dropped the R because I'm very French, right? I always do the French thing. But Margaret Fournier Holmes, brand newlywed, just added the Holmes to her last name a month ago. She is an amazing woman, and wait till you meet her if you don't already know her. She's been a registered nurse for 45 years, and she served in the Army for 27 years in the Army Nurse Corps, retiring just in 2012 as a lieutenant colonel. In fact, she is affectionately known as the Colonel because of her exceptional leadership skills, her attention to detail while serving in the Nurse Corps. She's got two children, a daughter-in-law, a granddaughter. They live in San Antonio, Texas. This woman is a powerhouse. She has 4 books that I'm going to, of course, let you know where you can get them. She's also been in multiple anthologies, all of which have been bestsellers. You want to take a look at her books, the colors of power, soaring to greatness, preparing for the harvest, planting good seeds of the kingdom, more and more and more. She's been on several magazines. This is my favorite thing. Her face gleamed the cover of Global Labor Events and Business magazine as the launch of the first production of the magazine and TV company in Nigeria. This woman, Dr. Margaret, is incredible. Let me bring her on the show. Dr. Margaret,
Why,
so nice
Trish?
to see you.
Good
I'm
to
so glad.
be here.
Yeah,
Good to be here.
you are such an accomplished woman, and I so appreciate you being here to share your experience today with our audience. And one of the things, we talked about, what should we title the broadcast? And you got a download of what to title the broadcast, right? And you called it Racism in a Dying World. Talk to me about
Right.
that.
Well, the world is slowly dying, and with my book that says "Preparing for the Kingdom," planting good seeds, we are slowly chipping away at racism. I asked the audience to just think back over the last year, George Floyd. This was the first time in 600 years that a police officer was actually charged for his death. That famous 11 minutes, then 17 minutes for total of a police officer filmed, got sentenced for that.
Yeah, first time found
First
guilty.
time. And so we're slowly chipping away at racism, although we have a long way to go. And still, a lot of people don't see racism as we see it because we live it.
Right.
And so I loved your introduction because it brings awareness that you are aware that there are differences. And with politics, we see racism. Wow, is before it used to be undercover. Now people are so bold as to bring it on TV and in front of us and speak harsh words and expect us to just turn over and walk away. Well, no, those times are over with because we are getting a voice now and we demand to be heard. I remember back when Black Lives Matter, people frowned on that and
Mm,
didn't want to use it. But now I visited DC for the inauguration and I went down that street where they actually have Black Lives Matter paved on the street. And you
right.
just didn't see that. And so we are chipping away at racism. And so it takes people who are in leadership positions to bring awareness and to make it okay for the rest of the people to talk about and to get into leadership position to make other races aware of just a tip of what we see.
Yeah, absolutely. And every movement needs allies within the traditional structure. White people
Mhm.
have to be a part of this. I have to say, I struggle with um, making sure that I'm an ally and not trying to come across as I know everything, right? I'm trying to learn and I'm trying to get better at even things I never understood. Like doing this show, one of my guests once shared with me that somebody she was having a rough day and they were at an event and this woman came up to her in a real slide way, said something like, "How you doing, gal?"
Mhm.
And my friend told me that gal was a derogatory term when you use it to Black women because you were called a house gal in slavery. Plus,
Hmm.
I read somewhere else. So it's all these little things. Like to me, that woman was just saying something that I would hear anybody say. But I
Mhm.
never understood how deep that word went because I was never told that. I was never told you don't say gal. So when you're looking at, I love how you said that we don't see it, we white people, we not people of color, because we don't live it, but you live it every day. And being in the military for such a long time, I've heard tell that there's racism pretty heavy duty in the military. Was that your experience?
Well, yes, and then I had so many strikes against me. One being black, two being a woman, and three being a high ranking officer. So I had all three strikes. And sometimes you couldn't tell which one was which because it was all negative when it came to the power that I possessed having all three of those, particularly the rank. Lieutenant colonel, as you know, is a very high ranking position.
Yes.
And so to have a black woman in that position as well um, was very, my white colleagues would often just, uh, they wouldn't treat me the same as they would someone that was not my color. And so it's when I gave an order for a soldier to do something. They did it for the rank, but it was, you could tell that they didn't really want to do that. But then, so you had to know your the regulations and the powers that existed because of your rank, not who you were, but whose you represented. I represented the Army. And so there are rules, there are protocols, and there are courtesies that all officers, you come into power when you get that rank. And so there are even the racism of how many black officers get promoted. So me alongside my white counterpart, because when our packet, as they call them, went to the board, which was our it was in St. Louis, Missouri. That's where all the records and things are kept. But in Arlington, Virginia, when your packet went before the board when it was promotion time, we were taught as black officers to make sure you had more in your packet than your counterpart, than your white counterpart, because the getting selected to full bird colonel, there were very, very few. And then with the drawdown, uh, there was even fewer. And so you could almost count on your finger or your hand how many black officers were promoted. And as you get more rank and more, the higher in rank that you went, the less they promoted. So our packet had to be crystal clear that we were higher, we had more, whether you were deployed more times, had more education, which is why I went on to get a PhD, two masters, a bachelor's, everything else. And my counterpart would probably only have a master's degree.
Or a BA.
Yeah. Well, and for the Army Nurse Corps, uh, you have to have at least a bachelor's of science in nursing, and
Okay.
so we had to have more. So it was extremely competitive.
Were you ever passed over, or did you get through your first
Oh my
time?
goodness! Well, passed over uh, for major.
Oh,
First of all, I was in the Air Force first. And so with that, when coming in, I came in as captain. And then uh, from that, just to make major, I mean, it was stationed here in San Antonio, Texas at Fort Sam, passed over because there were just the head nurse that I had an associate that was Air Force at the time. And I, of course, had my bachelor's going for my master's degree. And she gave me the hardest time ever. And so she would try to um, take the, even when I had my last child, he was very, very ill. And she wouldn't give me time off to go and be with him. He was 6 months old, upstairs in the same hospital, Wilford Hall. Just negativism. And then when I was going to the ceremonies for my master's degree, they scheduled me to work, knowing that it was my ceremonies. And so we had,
so
of course, at that time, a black liaison officer that we had to go to and complain. So people went with me and we complained that they put me on shift to work and nobody would switch with me so that I could go and graduate. And so she gave them an order that this one nurse would cover for me while I went to my
to the
ceremony.
graduation. So, Margaret, was that? Could you see that happening to all the people, or were you just seeing it against people of color? Like, did you?
To me, I saw people of color because we kind of hung together to compare and to give support for
Yes.
each other because there, as I said, the black officers were very few. So
Yes.
we had to hang together in order to bring up charges or to go to and file complaints. So we each had our own stories, but it was the same thing. It
Did
was
you
the
see
same
that
thing.
happening all the way through your retirement in 2012? Like, is this still happening to this day?
Well, let me tell you what happened for my retirement. Well, you may not know, but when one retires as an officer, you get a parade.
Nice.
Well, you get a parade, but you're there with everyone else for your retirement parade. Do you know that the Army Nurse Corps didn't give me one? And you get a flag that is given to you. I didn't receive one. And so when I asked for my flag, I got the runaround. So I had to file an complaint telling them that I didn't get a flag, and the nurse corps was refusing to give me a flag. Well, I was told by one of the Army Nurse Corps Reserve officers to go to the PX, which is for Army, is the exchange where you buy things for the military. And so they told me to go to the PX and buy a flag because they had them there. The audacity to tell me as a retired officer, retired lieutenant colonel, to buy my own flag.
After 27 years.
Yes, yes. So I received a flag in the mail from the officers of Inspector General, of the liaison that I had complained to.
Mm.
Can you? And I never got a parade, not to
I
this day.
So what was the explanation for that?
Just everybody kept passing the buck, saying whose responsibility it was. It's the nurse corps responsibility to take care of their officers, and that didn't come through for me.
Mm.
They did not, and to this day, I still have not had my parade. Yet I was told that once a month at any military facility, they have retirement parades. You can go there and get your parade. Who wants to do that? I wanted
No.
to have, and that's a cop out. That's an excuse. They did not take care of their officers, and I know racism had a lot to do with it because believe me, if it had been another officer of a different color, I would have been treated better.
Yeah,
Sad.
it's astonishing to
Yeah.
me. And yours is not the first story I heard about the
No.
military having really rampant racism.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that, you've been out of there since 2012, but you're right. In terms of people feeling emboldened now to
Hmm.
just be racist,
Right.
outwardly racist, and that's simply because of the tone of our country has
Right.
changed.
Right.
You know, I think from the leadership, however, wherever it came from, it's emboldening people. So, what are you seeing in terms of racism now in your everyday life? Or what have you experienced there?
Well, I once I retired from the military, I went on to get to work in the GS, the government service, doing the exact same
Right.
thing. And because I had so many degrees, they were intimidated because no one had more degrees than I did. And so being in the military and being bold with standing up for myself, it just in a way it was like, how dare you speak to me like that? As if I had no right when something was wrong because I called them on the carpet. You will do this
Yeah.
because it's right. And I would always go to their regulations. And once it's written, you cannot say that I created something different than what your policies and procedures say. So it wasn't long before I gave up my GS, my government position, and went on to own my own business because
Yeah.
that's the only way I felt safe and I could do as I was called to do, which was being a hospice nurse and taking care of the death and dying. Because, as I said, it was a calling, and the Lord had appointed me to take care of His own. So,
Well, I have to say thank you for what you do
thank you.
for people who are in hospice. Obviously, hospice has been around for a long time, and the people, I know you're a certified end of life trainer. People like you who have the skills to work with people who are at the end of their life and to make it rich and enjoyable and easy. I honor you, Dr. Margaret, for what you do and for the difference that you make, not just for the people who are leaving the planet, but for their families who are still going to be around here.
Right.
I know what hospice is. I experienced it with my own mother. And you, my friend, are an angel on this earth. You
Oh,
make a
wow.
huge difference.
Thank you. And hospice is a calling. So the Lord knew the path for me long in my mother's womb before I was even conceived. So I had to go through a lot of the trials and tribulations to get to this point. And so I wouldn't change my life, not for anything, because it's still, He brought me through this to get me to this point and to wherever He's going to take me. I just have to be an empty vessel and look at each circumstance as a growing for the position that He's put for me. And so not everyone is called to the same purpose. And so my purpose has been through the racism, through the retaliations, through all the trials and tribulations to get to this point,
Mm-hmm.
because the Lord has set me on a path that what He has for me, no one or nothing can take from me. So I love my crown that I was given because that crown is helping others. Can you imagine being that person before they transition to the Lord? What an honor.
Mm.
What an honor to be with someone before they transition to the Lord.
Yeah.
And so the oh I keep saying, Lord, you thought enough of me to give me this position?
Wow. You're
What an
amazing.
honor.
You're amazing. You're amazing. You're
Thank you.
amazing. So before we close, I'd like to ask you for people who are not aware but would like to be aware, or what do you say to people who just don't get the systemic racism? You and I were talking earlier
Mhm.
about a young boy, Elijah McCain, who was murdered last year. And
Mhm.
sorry, it's not even last year. I lost a year because of
You're
COVID.
not 2019.
19, right? And he was killed by an officer who gave him a chokehold that's now not allowed anymore. And we still see these things happening. We still see this. I mean, even though, yes, we've made some real inroads with an officer being held accountable um, for George Floyd's murder. That's an amazing thing. But what do you say to people who want to make a difference? Any suggestions on what people who are not of color can do to make a difference? Anything you'd like to share with them?
Well, they have to be open. And we have to be open and understand that some just don't know. And so
Right.
not to be harsh on those who have true meaning. And when they come to you, just like we were talking about the word gal. Now, I was never aware of gal being a derogatory coming up because I just didn't know. So some people just don't know. And the spirit inside you will be able to differentiate the difference in the people's sincerity. And those who continue to be racial simply because they can, because of past administration gave them permission
Right.
to come out in the open. We had seen that long before, but it was hidden. And so we learned to still live in a racial world and still get ahead,
Yeah.
um, because we were taught you don't say this, you say yes, sir, yes, ma'am, because we want you home that night. Don't be cussing or saying your rights and all that because they will kill you and get away with it. So
Yeah.
we were taught very early that you would be polite. Whatever they asked for, you gave them. You put your pride and ego in your pocket, and you come home. And if you need a place to grieve, grieve at home.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to see that change. I'm reading a book right now, little bit at a time. It's so good. I actually go back and read it again. It's called Caste by Isabel Wilkerson,
Hmm.
and it is an excellent history lesson on the division between black and white,
Hmm.
and how black and white is actually a social construct. There's no such thing as black and white. There's Ethiopian, Nigerian,
Right.
German, Italian, Honduran. But as the slave trade began, we put people in either black or white, and it's totally been the curse of us in the US and some in the UK as well. So I recommend reading that. The other thing
Yeah.
I think is that you're right. I don't think that people who've been socialized as white see racism, obviously, like you do every day. So I want to invite everybody to take a look at the website 1milliontruths.com. That's 1 million truths. And what it is it's dedicated to truth and reconciliation. It's a place for Black Americans and allies to bear witness to the scale of racism in everyday life, which of course is the whole purpose of this show, is to just bring racism to everyday life that is happening every day that we don't see. Because people can be racist, but most people are not. Most people do not own the title racism, but we live in a structure that was created to support it. So
Hmm.
we don't see that structure, and 1 million truths will help you to see it. So I urge all of you to just take a little bit of time and grow a little bit every day. Read something, open up your mind. Like Dr. Margaret said, it's all about expanding your thinking.
And
Thank
if you think about it, it is now acceptable to see interracial marriages. If you look at the TV now, they can do that. Long before they weren't able to do that. And
Yeah.
people who married interracially were usually targeted for a lot of riots and
Well, and
discrimination.
all those Jim Crow laws that were on the books about marriage, and we can get into the history of this, but I can tell you that what I've learned is that when Hitler was trying to systemically remove those who are lesser, Jews, gays, gypsies, they studied the Jim Crow laws of the South. And that's the first thing they did was they stopped intermarriage so that the races could be seen as separate and totally apart. So those Jim Crow laws, I just went to the Civil Rights Museum in Atlanta last week. Oh
Wow.
my God, what an experience. What an experience. They have a bunch of interactive displays, and those Jim Crow laws, some of them were not off the books in terms of intermarriage until the 1990s. Right. So all that to say is we have a history that has been built upon keeping the Black person down. The caste that's exactly what it is. It's a caste system like India, or like, I hate to say it, but Nazi Germany, who actually followed what we were doing. So we have come a long way, my friend, and we have yet a long way to go. So I thank you so much for
Thank
being
you.
here, for sharing your story, for sharing your truth, and for being who you are, an amazing woman who motivates, who dedicates, who educates, who makes a difference for us all. Make sure you go to Amazon and take a look at Dr. Margaret's books. They are really, talk about opening your mind. They will open your mind for sure. Thank you all for being with us today. I appreciate all of you. Dr. Margaret, thank you.
Thank
And
you.
we will be back again with another episode of Sister to Sister. Everyone have a fantastic day. Thank you for hitting that share button. You see that share button and that like button and that little comment thing? Take a minute to give us a comment, and thank you for sharing, everyone. Have a great day.
Yes.